We're at the Ford Field and River Club today with Director of Golf Course and Grounds, Jared Nemitz, to talk about the process that he uses on his Ultradwarf putting greens to make sure the grain is aligned whenever they change hole locations. So Jared, why don't you tell us why it's important to make sure that that grain is properly aligned?
With our low mowing heights and variety of cultural practices that we do here, it's important to have that grain aligned properly so that we don't have a scalp plug on our greens that leaves unsightly looking plugs on the putting green.
So it's not just an agronomic thing, but it also has effects aesthetically, obviously. If we're ripping that turf off instead of cutting it, then we're going to be left with some bare soil, essentially.
And it can look very unsightly dotted across a putting green.
Gotcha. Well, hey, let's go take a look at this process and see how you guys do it. So now we're here with Evan, and Evan's going to walk us through the process that they use to change hole locations on their greens to make sure that grain stays aligned. But before we get into the process, Evan, why don't you explain to everybody how you identify which way the grain is going?
Okay. So preferred method that I like to use is I'll really get down into the ground and I'll feel for the grain, and I'll really be feeling for against the grain when it gets some pushback, and then I know that coming back down the other way, that's going to be down grain, that's going to be the direction I'm looking for to line it up on the cup cutter there.
So down grain it feels smooth, and if you're rubbing your hand into the grain it'll feel a little rougher and kind of stand that grass up.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay, what about the color of the grass? I know sometimes golfers will use the color or the appearance on the surface to tell which way is down grain and which way is into the grain. Do you like that option?
Yeah, that's definitely a good one. As you're walking up to the green, you can look and see you'll have some light areas, some dark areas, and really what that's just showing you is the lighter areas are going down grain, and then those darker areas are just going to be coming back towards you there. So what we're looking for, a big point of this is aligning the grain and everything. And so what we have here on our cup cutter is we have an indicator. In this case we have an arrow right here on the top, and we always align that down grain. And so that way when we cut the pin, we'll know the arrow's pointing down grain for the plug that we'll have in there. And then when we go to replace it from the old pin, you can just set it right in, aligned with the grain there.
Gotcha. Okay, so I noticed this type of this hole cutter you have here, it's the type where you just pound it into the ground. There's no twisting and turning. That seems to me like it might make this process a little bit easier.
I think so. It locks into place. So with that indicator, whenever you pound it into the ground, you lock it into place, and then that holds your direction. And then it's really, none of that turning and spinning like you were talking about. It's just you knock it in and pull it out.
Yeah. So I guess if you had a different type of hole cutter and you were twisting and turning, maybe you'd have to put an indicator on either the high side or the low side with a dot just to make sure that you knew what was high or what was low, however you indicated it. But this certainly seems like an easier option because there is no twisting and turning involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. Well, hey, give it a run and let's see how this thing works.
Okay, yeah, so, like we were talking about, this is my way of doing it. I'll get down, finding the grain. So what I'm looking for is I feel for that pushback, so that way I know I'm going into the grain. Kind of feeling it going back behind me here.
Down grain that way?
It's down grain coming this way.
So point your arrow down grain?
Yep, that's it right there. Looking good, and then I'll just go after it. So as I start to get close, we have a little red line indicator on the depth gauge here. And so I'm on it there. I'll lock it back into place and then just pull it right out. So it's back to that first process, getting down, checking for that grain again, feeling for which the rough side, the smooth side. So I've actually got it coming back towards me here. And so as we addressed earlier, I have the indicator here, knowing that my grain is going down. And so I'll just take it in, set it down in there, and then just make sure I get it in there clean, knock it down a little bit, and then pull it out, tamp it down a little bit, and then got a pretty good plug there. So now it's just the
standard mending of the plug, huh?
Right. I like to bring it up a little bit just to level out all the edges there. Take a little bit of green sand, filling in my voids, and then I'll roll it. Just a little piece of pipe here. Roll it up. I like to do two directions, just to make sure I get both sides taken care of there. Feel it out, make sure it's not high, and make sure it's not too low either.
So one thing I did notice is that down grain from the new hole was this way, and then here we were different directions. So it's not always as easy as just taking it out and keeping the cup in the same direction. It's going to need to shift from where you're removing it and where you're replacing it.
Right, absolutely. And if you look at the green, kind of where we were at with the new one, it's more of a darker area. Looking back on it, we're here where we are looking. It's more lighter, so it's just that change of grain, change of color, kind of how we talked about earlier.
Very cool. Well, hey man, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of guys are going to find this useful on their Bermuda grass greens. So, thank you.